The first time the town of Bitter Creek heard of Emery Bell, it was through a telegram sent in poor handwriting and worse spelling. It had been arranged by the widowed baker, Alma Pryor, who'd asked a correspondence agency in Omaha to send her a husband, someone big-boned, kind, and decent, with no fuss about station or family name. She'd marked her age honestly, 44, and signed it simply, a woman who still needs with both hands. What arrived 2 weeks later was a man nearly too broad for the stagecoach door, wearing a bowler hat pulled too low to hide the sag of his cheeks and the purple veins in his jowls. Emery stepped down onto the dusty street with a thud that made the horses glance back. His boots were polished, but the polish couldn't hide the swelling in his feet. He stood a full head taller than the driver, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief already damp. The town stared. Children whispered behind their hands. He nodded once shyly and said, "Name's Emery. I'm here for Mrs. Pryor." But Alma wasn't there to meet him. She sent the letter, yes. But in the endless silence of waiting, months without reply, she had grown embarrassed of the idea. When the telegram came announcing his arrival, she almost tore it in half. She hadn't pictured someone so large, someone who looked like he might eat through a winter's worth of stores in a week. She sent her helper girl to tell him she changed her mind. By the time the girl arrived, Emery had already walked to the bakery, suitcase in hand, eyes wide with the scent of cinnamon and yeast. The girl told him plain, "Mrs. Pryor ain't interested no more. Sorry, sir." "You can get the next coach back out." He didn't speak, just nodded, then sat on his suitcase at the edge of the road for hours, not asking anyone for help, not moving, not even as the sun sank behind the red hills and long shadows crawled over the main street. When night came, he wandered to the saloon and asked for a room. He paid with $2 silver from a leather pouch he kept tied at his belly. He did not drink that night. He sat on the edge of the cot, his suitcase unopened, staring out the cracked window at a town that had already dismissed him. Bitter Creek was not kind to outliers. A man his size, his softness, his northern accent, he was an object of ridicule. Within 2 days, someone chalked "hog husband" on the saloon door. Within 3, they started tossing bread crusts at his feet in the street, like feeding a stray. He tried to leave, bought a coach ticket. But the driver, a lean man with a knife scar over his brow, laughed and said, "We don't take hogs past the pass. Weight limit." So Emery stayed. He rented a room month to month, did odd repairs for a preacher who could hardly hammer in a nail straight. He started walking each morning before sunrise, slow circles around the outskirts. By late summer, he'd lost a little of the roundness in his face, but the town never changed its tune. Alma kept seeing him through the window of her bakery, hunched under the porch of the general store during storms, or pushing a wheelbarrow full of bricks at the parson's lot. There was no grand transformation. He still moved with heaviness, still stammered when spoken to, but she noticed other things. He gave half his bread to the orphan boy who slept in the alley behind the stables. He fixed the broken handle on her bakery door when she was out delivering. He didn't look her in the eye, not anymore. She baked extra on Sundays and left it on his stoop without note. He never thanked her, but he ate every bite. Then, in the second week of September, 3 men came into town. They brought rifles, worn saddles, and questions about a man named Emery Bell. They didn't smell like lawmen. They smelled like debt collectors. And they didn't ask twice when folks looked confused. They just nodded and went looking. That night, the saloon-keeper found Emery's room empty, his suitcase gone, window cracked open. But Alma found him before they did. Found him sleeping in the flour cellar of her bakery, curled like a child, eyes red from weeping. She didn't ask questions. She brought down a blanket, placed it over his wide shoulders, and said, "You can stay." He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. She locked the hatch behind her and baked 24 loaves. When morning came, the dead men were gone. That was how it began, not with love or even forgiveness, but with a cellar, a lock, and the knowledge that sometimes even the largest man can disappear if someone chooses to keep him safe. Emery stayed in the cellar through the fall, breathing in the scent of yeast and ash, listening to the crackle of the oven upstairs and the steady scrape of Alma's broom over floorboards. She spoke little, brought him meals wrapped in linen. Always the same knock, 3 soft raps, then the click of the latch. She never lingered. Outside, the men who'd hunted him left Bitter Creek empty-handed, but not without promises. "Tell him next time we'll bring fire," the last one said to the saloon keeper, his voice like stone dragging on steel. No one told Alma. She knew without being told. The first snow came early that year. When frost laced the window panes and the river stiffened into silence, she brought Emery a coat, one her husband had worn in the last year of his life. It barely fit over Emery's shoulders. The sleeves strained at the elbows, the buttons pulled at the belly, but he wore it like armor. By then he had started helping before dawn, silent as a shadow. He would come up before the sky lightened, sweep the bakery, stoke the fires, carry sacks of flour that made Alma's back seize with pain. He never asked, he simply did. She began leaving instructions on scraps of paper. Mix this, knead that. Watch the rye, don't let it burn. He followed each one exactly, writing back only when necessary, his handwriting round and careful. One note read, "This bread is yours. I just watch it rise." She folded that one into her apron and never threw it away. By winter's deep heart, Bitter Creek noticed. They didn't say his name. Still called him that hog man when they spoke of him, if they spoke at all. But they noticed the bakery stayed open longer, that Alma smiled more often, if only faintly. The bread came out warmer, softer, crusts like golden skin. One man swore it tasted different. "More alive," he said, and then laughed as if to swallow the truth of it. It was in late January that Alma's younger brother, Doyle, returned from the mines. He had not seen her in 3 years and didn't recognize Emery when he walked into the kitchen in his socks. Flour streaked across his neck, apron looped crooked around his belly. Doyle reached for the rifle in the corner before Alma stepped between them. "He works here," she said. "He lives here," Doyle asked. "He eats," Alma said. "He works, he keeps watch." Doyle didn't speak for a while. Just stared at Emery, who lowered his head and wiped his hands on the cloth. At supper that night, Doyle leaned close across the table and said, "You're the one they came for." "I was," Emery said. "You still owe." Emery didn't answer. Alma stood and cleared the plates before either man moved again. She scrubbed them until the china lost its shine. That night, she sat alone by the stove, thinking of her first husband, who had died slow and bitter from drink, whose hands had only been kind when she was young and still quiet. She thought of how she'd once believed survival meant silence, but Emery had never raised a hand, never shouted, never expected more than he was given. And yet the town despised him, because of his size, because of his silence. Because he was not made to threaten, and therefore seemed not to belong. In February, Emery began sleeping in the pantry instead of the cellar. No one said anything. He folded the blanket himself each morning, left the floor swept, the cans lined neat along the wall. One night she found a loaf he'd made on his own oat and honey, braided like a crown. It was imperfect, the crust cracked at the bend, but the inside was soft and warm. She ate every slice. One morning, Alma caught him standing by the back door before sunrise, holding a rifle. "They sent another letter," he said. "The preacher handed it off last night." She took the note. The handwriting was different, jagged, rushed. "We know he's there." "You can't bake him away. Let them come," she said. His shoulders sagged in disbelief. "You don't owe me this." "No," she said, "but you're the only man who's never made me feel like a ledger to be balanced." He didn't reply. Just closed the door and turned the bolt. The second time they came, it was not 3 men, but 6. 2 with pistols, one with a scar down his lip that made him drool when he grinned. They arrived with the spring melt, the ground still soft enough to mark their boot prints. They came just before dawn, but Emery had been waiting, and Alma had been watching. She met them first, apron dusted with flour, standing alone on the porch. They asked for Emery. She said, "Ain't no Emery here, but we've got hog for breakfast if that's what you're hungry for." The one with the scar stepped forward, grinning. She didn't move. Behind the shutters, Emery waited with the rifle, heart thudding like a war drum. But they didn't draw, not yet, just left a warning, etched into the side of the bakery with a knife. A word Emery would not speak aloud. It made Alma's face go cold. They weren't finished, and now they knew she would lie for him. That night she sat across from Emery at the table, the oil lamp between them. She said, "Tell me what they want." He stared at his hands. "I left a place I shouldn't have, took money that wasn't mine, but I didn't steal it. I earned it. They just didn't want to pay me." "What for?" "Work harder than anything I ever did here. 7 years hauling stone for a man who promised a share and never gave it, so I took what I could and ran." She studied his face. "You come to Bitter Creek for a wife or for cover?" "Both," he said. "But I stayed for something else." She didn't ask what. Instead, she stood, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then we'll make them regret ever setting eyes on this town." He nodded, the lamp flickered, the siege had begun. By April, word spread that the bakery kept more than flour behind its doors. Bitter Creek whispered, half in ridicule, half in fear, that Alma Pryor had taken a fugitive under her roof and that she aimed to keep him. But no one dared knock, not since the night 6 men came with threats and left without bread or bullets, only a warning carved in the wood. Alma patched over the scarred planks herself, hands steady. Emery stood behind her, watching the street like a dog trained to bite. The town changed its eyes. No more thrown bread crusts, no more snide jokes in passing. The insults turned inward, muttered behind doors. It wasn't fear of Emery. They could still outpace him, still outweighed him in cruelty. It was Alma's defiance that unsettled them. A woman who had lost a husband and buried a child, who never remarried and rarely spoke, had drawn a line in the dirt and dared the world to cross it. Inside the bakery, life took on a rhythm sharper than before. Each morning, Emery rose first. He no longer asked what needed doing. He sharpened knives, hauled barrels, sealed the windows with thick timber in case fire came. Alma watched him move, slower now but steadier. The soft weight that once sagged from his frame had become something else, dense, deliberate. He was not made for speed, but he did not break. Not when lifting, not when sweating, not when fear slipped under the doors like smoke. In May, Doyle returned. He had been scouting, sent by Alma with 2 weeks' wages and a map drawn in candlelight. He came back with dust on his boots and a deep cut across his forearm. "They'll return," he said. "They're circling, not law, not bounty, just men who want to make a point." Alma nodded. "How long?" 10 days. Maybe less." She looked at Emery then, not with pity, not with regret, but with calculation. "We need to make it cost them." The bakery transformed. They emptied the flour sacks and filled some with sand, stacked them behind the windows as cover. Emery braced the cellar hatch with iron nails. Doyle scavenged metal from the old rail house and forged spikes to bury in the soil. Alma baked every day, more than they could sell, storing loaves in crates, not for profit, but for siege. The whole town knew and watched, and no one offered help. Bitter Creek had chosen silence long ago. On the 6th night, Alma sat by the fire and asked Emery what he missed. "Nothing," he said. "Everyone misses something." He shook his head. "I had a sister. She died young. After that, I worked. Didn't stop. didn't live right, didn't eat right. People only looked at me like I was worth something when I could lift what they couldn't or take a blow that would flatten them. She studied the lines on his face. They had softened again, not with fat, but with age and something gentler. He had the look of a man who had never expected a second chance and still didn't quite believe he was living it. "What do you want now?" she asked. He thought a long time before answering. To be remembered by someone who isn't ashamed of it. She didn't reply, just reached across the table and rested her hand over his. When the men came, they didn't come quiet. It was dusk, and the sky over Bitter Creek burned orange as if lit from beneath. Horses kicked dust into the air, and rifle barrels glinted in the last light. 7 riders, 1 wagon, more than expected, enough to make it final. The bakery was ready. They didn't speak, just opened fire. Windows shattered, flour dust choked the air. Alma shouted once, "Cellar," but Emery didn't move. He stood at the front door, shotgun in hand, eyes wide and steady. Doyle took position at the side hatch, already bleeding from a graze across the ribs. It wasn't war, not in the grand way people write about. It was uglier, shorter, made of wood splinters and hot metal and screams that sounded too close to dying. The first 2 men didn't make it past the threshold. Emery shot one, then tackled the second through the porch rail and drove a boot into his throat until he stopped thrashing. They poured in, too many. Alma took a blade across her forearm, but still threw boiling water in a man's face before clubbing him with a rolling pin. Doyle broke a chair across someone's back. Blood soaked into flour, turned the white floor pink. By the end it was quiet, 3 men dead. 2 more crawled off into the dark, dragging wounds they'd never forget. One begged for mercy and got it, barely. Emery sat in the ashes of the back wall, bleeding from the thigh, breath heaving like bellows. Alma knelt beside him, pressing cloth to the wound. "You stayed," she said. "I had nowhere else," he whispered. "That's not why." He didn't answer. Later, when they burned the bodies outside town limits, the sheriff arrived at last. Looked at the blood, the broken door, the scorched wood, asked no questions, took no notes. "I see no law broken here," he said. No one corrected him. The town never thanked them, never asked, never changed. But they stopped calling him Hog Husband. They started calling him Mr. Bell, and Alma Pryor no longer walked alone. Summer came hard that year. Dry wind swept through Bitter Creek, stripping leaves before they had time to ripen, curling paint from doorframes, turning water barrels into stale basins of dust. But in the ruins of the bakery, something new took root. They rebuilt slowly, plank by plank, with Emery doing most of the lifting, Doyle hammering, while still favoring the arm that had been nearly split to the bone. Alma worked in silence. Not out of grief, there had been no mourning for the men buried beyond the ridge, but out of focus. Her eyes had the gleam of someone who'd survived the worst part of a storm and refused to look back. The new bakery opened in late July. No ribbon, no announcement, just the scent of bread again filling the street as if the soul of Bitter Creek had returned to its chest. People came quietly, money in hand, heads low. No one mentioned the shootout. No one asked where the bloodstains had gone. They simply bought their loaves and left, casting furtive glances at Emery behind the counter, hands dusted with flour, face set like stone. Children stopped calling him names. One girl left him a drawing of a bear and wrote, "Thank you, Mr. Bell," beneath it. He kept it folded in his coat pocket. Alma began speaking more, not much, but enough. She would lean on the counter in the cool hours between baking, talk of recipes she wanted to try or repairs needed on the chimney. Once, she mentioned how her late husband used to say bread was a poor man's gold. Emery just nodded. He slept in the pantry still, though she had offered him the spare room twice. He declined both times with a mumble and a bowed head. Late one night, after the bakery closed and Doyle had gone to town with cards in his pocket and a pistol on his belt, Alma poured Emery a glass of cider and said, "You've more than earned your keep." I know, he said. You don't talk much about what comes next. He looked into the fire. I've never known how to want a future. She didn't speak, just let the silence fill the space between them like cooling dough. Later, she handed him a key for the door. If I'm ever not here. He took it like it was fragile. August passed. Then September. Emery grew quieter, not withdrawn but watchful. He stopped walking the outskirts at dawn. Instead, he kept to the bakery, rising earlier than before, sometimes before the rooster, already mixing before the oven was lit. He was waiting again. For what, he didn't know. Then in the second week of October, Doyle came home late with a gash on his scalp and blood on his boots. New men asking about you, he said. Meaner than before, better paid. How many? 4, maybe 5, not all in one place. But they're tracking you. One asked if the fat man still bakes bread. Emery didn't react, just stared at the table. Alma said, they'll find nothing they haven't already bled for. This time, Doyle said, they might not be looking to blade. They're looking to take you. Let them try, Emery said softly. They prepared again, not as before with traps and nails, but with paperwork. Alma had a friend from Denver, a clerk, send official documents. Within a week, Emery Bell was legal owner of half the bakery, his name inked beside hers in thick, sure lettering. You're not just staying, she said. You're standing. He didn't protest, didn't smile. Just laid a heavy hand on the counter and nodded once. In the nights that followed, Alma caught him waking at odd hours, checking the locks, walking the perimeter. One night she followed him and found him sitting in the dark beside the stone oven, not weeping, not moving. Just there, she didn't ask what haunted him. She sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and they said nothing until the sun broke the ridge. The men came 2 weeks later. This time they brought no fire, no show. Just a single wagon under a pale moon, parked outside the bakery with no horses hitched. 4 men stepped down. One held a pistol loose in his hand. Another wore a long black coat that fluttered when he walked. They knocked. Alma answered. Emery stood behind her, eyes dark. We're not here to kill, said the man in the coat. We're here for debt. Mr. Bell took what was not his. Alma said, you've already been paid. Blood and bone. What more do you want? The man smiled. We want memory, to make sure he's never safe. She nodded once, then turned to Emery. It's your choice. He stepped forward. His face, once soft and round, now looked carved from something ancient. Not cruel, just done with fear. You want memory, he said. The men nodded. He lifted his shirt. Beneath the fabric, scars crossed his belly, old burns, and one long seam where a blade had kissed too deep. This is what it cost me to live. You think I'm ashamed? You think I'll run? The man in the coat didn't speak. You want me gone, then kill me now. Otherwise, you get nothing. Silence, then the pistol man shifted, uneasy. Alma didn't blink. Eventually, the coat man spat in the dust, turned on his heel. Not worth the coin, he said, and they left, for good. That night, Alma sat beside Emery on the bakery's back steps. They watched the stars rise like seeds flung from the earth. Still want to be remembered, she asked. Not for being fat, he said. You won't be, she said. You'll be remembered for staying, for standing. He didn't speak again, just rested his shoulder against hers and exhaled the last breath of the man he used to be. Winter returned like an old wound, slow, grinding, always deeper than remembered. Bitter Creek tightened its belt as it did every year, but this time the bakery stood taller than before, rebuilt with thicker beams, new windows, a chimney that never stopped smoking. The loaves came out earlier, stayed warmer longer. People lined up without speaking much, and they no longer flinched when Emery handed them bread. Children greeted him by name now. Mr. Bell, they'd say, or just Sir. He'd nod in return, shy but steady, a man made whole not by escape, but by staying when it would have been easier to flee. He had not left since the second visit. Not for market, not for firewood. Doyle ran those errands. Alma baked and Emery cleaned, mixed, carried, guarded. Their rhythm had become something like a heartbeat, quiet, unnoticed until stopped. Every once in a while, Alma caught herself humming while kneading, something she hadn't done since girlhood. She never mentioned it aloud. Then, in early January, a telegram arrived. The boy from the depot handed it over with both hands like something heavy. Alma read it once, folded it, and placed it beneath the counter. She said nothing for 3 days. Emery waited. He knew that silence. On the fourth morning, she handed it to him. Your pardon is issued. Property claim recognized. Charges dismissed by Circuit Judge, Red County. He read it twice before the words settled. I'm free, he said, not with joy but disbelief. You are, she said. He sat on the stool beside the back door, looking not at the words but through them. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden absence of it. What do you do with yourself, he asked, when the running stops? She didn't answer, just placed a hand on his shoulder and said, Now you live like a man, not a shadow. The days that followed passed slower. There was no more threat, no weight behind each knock. Yet Emery felt unmoored, like the danger had anchored him. Without it he drifted. Alma noticed. So she handed him the deed papers again, this time marked with a final change. She had signed over full co-ownership, 50-50. You're not something I've hidden, she said. You're something I've chosen. He swallowed hard, the kind of breath taken when grief meets grace. They began hosting suppers every Sunday. Not large affairs, just Doyle, sometimes the stable boy, once the sheriff. Alma cooked what she'd once saved for holidays: rabbit stew, bread with herbs, pies that reminded people they weren't born for survival alone. Emery sat at the head of the table once. No one questioned it. In early February he bought a horse. It was small, nothing fancy, but it meant something. He named her Finch. Took to brushing her every night, humming a low, tuneless sound. And then on a windless morning, Alma found a ring on the flour sack. Not new, tarnished, thick-fingered, probably once pulled from some pawn in a river town. Inside it was etched a single letter. He said nothing, just waited. She didn't put it on, not that day. She placed it in a drawer beside her measuring spoons. Later, she asked, You ever think about starting again? Somewhere new? He shook his head, only ever wanted one place to call mine. She nodded. You have it now. They didn't marry that spring, nor the next. There was no ceremony, no preacher's blessing. But by the second year, folks in town stopped calling her widow Pryor. They said Mrs. Bell, and she never corrected them. By then, Emery had built a bench outside the shop. Children sat on it with cookies in hand, old men dozed in the sun, lovers paused before the long walk home. He sanded the wood himself, carved a small image into the backrest. A loaf split in two, steam rising. He rarely left Bitter Creek, not because he feared what lay beyond, but because he no longer needed to outrun anything. Men from other towns sometimes passed through, some stared. Some asked quiet questions. He answered only if he felt like it. He owed no one his shame. By his fourth winter, his frame had changed again, not thin, never thin, but firm and grounded. The children stopped saying big like a barrel and said instead, strong like the oven. He wore a new coat that year. Alma made it from scratch, the buttons wide enough for his chest, the sleeves long enough for his arms. Inside the lining, she sewed a phrase in tight, invisible stitches. Let no man measure your worth by what he cannot carry. He found it 6 weeks later and wept without making a sound. The sixth spring bloomed early, and with it came the first real rains in years. Bitter Creek swelled with green, wildflowers pushing through cracks in the stone, the river fat with meltwater. The town stirred like a beast roused from slumber, restless and uncertain. Emery stood taller now, though his gait still held a slight limp from the wound that never quite healed right. The townsfolk no longer whispered when he passed. Some even tipped their hats. He had become part of the map, a landmark, not a warning. And Alma, once the silent widow who kept her gaze down and her grief closer than breath, now moved with assurance, her voice a thread that stitched together bakery and town. One morning a stranger arrived. She rode alone on a mule too skinny for the road, wrapped in a red shawl despite the warmth. Her face was lined with years, but her eyes were sharp, searching. She entered the bakery just before closing and asked for rye. Alma handed her a loaf, wrapped in brown paper. Traveling far. The woman nodded, looking for a man used to be called Emery Bell. Said to be fat as sin, and just as hard to lose. Alma froze only slightly. Behind the counter, Emery stepped out from the back, towel over one shoulder. I used to be fat, he said. Still hard to lose. The woman narrowed her eyes, then smiled. Damn, she said, you do look different. Her name was June Whitlow, from Illinois. She said she'd worked at the same quarry once, years back. Claimed to have seen what was done to him, what was taken. I owed you, she said. Couldn't sleep for near a decade. Now I'm here to settle that. She pulled a small parcel from her satchel. A stack of documents, signed and notarized, detailing the labor theft, the abuse, the names of the men responsible. They're gone now, most dead, some hiding in Mexico, but I kept the records. I figured, if you were still running, you might need them. Emery didn't speak, just looked at the bundle like it was made of bones. I'm not running, he said. She stayed the night. Alma gave her the cot in Doyle's old room. They drank cider late and talked in low tones. June left at sunrise, riding east, and never returned. That summer the bakery expanded. Emery built a smokehouse out back. Alma added a new oven, deeper and hotter. They hired 2 girls from the orphanage in Weyburn, paid them fair, taught them slow. By mid-season, Alma grew tired quicker. Her hands, once strong, began to ache. Emery noticed first. He started rising earlier still, kneading longer, adjusting recipes when she forgot the salt. She wouldn't speak of it, not at first. Then, in early August, she collapsed beside the oven. Just dropped to her knees, lips white, breath gone like smoke through the flue. Emery carried her upstairs, wrapped her in blankets, fed her broth by spoon. The doctor came twice. Left with a grim look and a folded note. Alma read it. Then burned it. You need rest, Emery said. I need to work, she said. You'll kill yourself. She looked him full in the face. Better to die doing what I built with my hands than rot in a bed waiting for permission. So they compromised. He handled the bread, she did the books. He made the rounds, she wrote the orders. And when her body couldn't take even that, she sat near the window, teaching the orphan girls how to shape dough with care. That fall, the wind shifted. Cold crept in early, the kind that seeped into the marrow. Alma coughed through most nights. Emery sat beside her, feeding the stove, keeping her feet wrapped in warm cloth. Do you remember, she whispered once, when I wouldn't even meet your eyes? He nodded. I was a coward then, she said. No, he replied, you were surviving. She closed her eyes. Same thing. In October they held a gathering, not quite a wedding, not quite a farewell. Just townsfolk, lanterns, food enough for 30. The bakery was lit from corner to corner, and Alma sat upright in a cane-backed chair, cheeks flushed with the effort of simply being there. A preacher read a passage neither of them had chosen. Children sang. One of the girls from Weyburn gave a speech so nervous it made everyone cry. Emery stood beside Alma the whole time, his hand resting gently on hers. That night, when the crowd had gone and the stars pricked holes in the sky, he said, You made me a man, Alma. She smiled. You always were. I just made you stop apologizing for it." She fell asleep in the rocker, soft breath like the ocean in a shell. Outside, snow began to fall. The snow stayed late that year, draping Bitter Creek in silence. The kind of quiet that settles between breaths, heavy with meaning. Inside the bakery, the fire never died, even when Alma stopped waking. It happened in the still hour before dawn. Emery found her slumped forward in the rocker, hands folded in her lap, one palm clutching a torn scrap of linen stitched with the word "rise." No note, no farewell. Just the way she lived, spare and solid and unmistakably her. He didn't weep at first, just sat beside her, the heat from the stove warming her cooling hands. The girls from Weyburn found him like that hours later, unmoving. They didn't speak, they simply brought blankets and lit another fire. Bitter Creek buried her on a frost-cracked hill behind the church, where morning light first touched. The whole town came, even the sheriff. Doyle returned from the northern camps, hat in hand, and stood 3 steps back from the grave, as if afraid to touch too much of what she'd built. No one said Emery's name during the service. But they all watched him, how he stood without swaying, how he carried her coffin as if it weighed less than a sack of flour, how his eyes never left the earth as the first shovelful dropped. Afterward, he returned to the bakery, alone. The place smelled different, too clean, too still. He swept every surface, cleaned out the pantry, folded her apron and placed it in the drawer where she'd once hidden the ring. He didn't open that drawer again. The next morning the fire was lit again before sunrise. Emery baked, quietly, slowly, without help. The girls offered, but he shook his head. That first week he gave every loaf away, said nothing about why. In time, the bakery reopened. It wasn't the same, couldn't be, but the rhythm returned, 1 loaf, then 2, one day, then the next. Emery worked until the pain in his knees grew sharper than hunger. He aged into something sturdy. Not old exactly, just unmoved by time. He didn't remarry, didn't leave. His name stayed on the sign next to hers, Pryor and Bell. Even when the paint flaked off, he didn't repaint, said the son would remember for them. Children grew. The girls he trained became women. One moved to Helena, one married a trapper. One took over the counter and ran it like Alma had, quietly, without fuss, without asking the world for anything but its respect. Emery lived upstairs. Never took another room. He sat in the rocker sometimes, the one she died in, his hands folded just like hers. Strangers came through town and asked who the big man was. The one who never raised his voice but always got what he needed. The one who never left a plate dirty or a hurt unfed. Some said he used to be a fugitive. Others said he was once twice his size, a man mocked and broken, left behind. But none of those stories stuck, because the truth was simpler. He was a man who had once been hidden and then chosen. A man who had come to Bitter Creek expecting to be cast off and found something holy instead. And when at last he did not rise one morning, they buried him beside her beneath a stone that read, he stayed, no verse, no dates, just the truth carved deeper than memory, and the bakery kept on. The fire stayed lit. The bread still rose.